This is Two on One, the internet's top sensation, wherein two disciples, theologians, talk to another theologian of any flavor about the pop culture topic of his, her, or their choosing. Hi, I am your co-host, the Reverend Arthur Stewart.
And I am your other co-host. Do we go by Vicar Spiff? What is? We don't use Vicar as a title. I don't even know how that would go, but I felt like I needed to change it today. But I am your other co-host, Stephanie Kendall, the Reverend Stephanie Kendall.
It's so very British of you. It's good to see you, Vicar Spiff. I've decided I'm the Archbishop of Wichita, Arthur Stewart.
I like it. We're both like very not British, like the vicar, like
the vicar.
Our very American accents.
There's a great podcast called Totalis Rankium, and their American impression is "Give me another Bud Light, hot damn," and I love it.
Not incorrect.
No.
Arthur, how are you?
You know, I'm good. It's good to see you. I've been looking forward to this, and it's a good thing. For those of you who are listening, hi deuces who are audio only, I just want to note that Spiff is wearing her clergy collar right now, and I'm wearing my robe, which I don't think I've put on in 2 years.
I was going to say, it's been a while since I've seen you in a robe.
And also, though, on that robe is my Lenten stole made by Jeff One Row Designs.
We called it Jeff One Row. So I was like, you're putting on your robe. You got to put on that Jeff One Row stole. Is it crane? Is it another crane one?
Yeah. So I'm actually collecting all of the cranes.
Collect them all. It's like a Pokemon.
Right. It's seasonally appropriate. And I do note that it is, for those of you who are audio only, again, it is purple with varying cranes in various patterns. And it's lovely. And it's one of my absolute favorite things.
It is really beautiful. And you know what, our church is coming back into worship for the first time since March of 2020. I know it's that's assuming everything goes well and, everyone stays healthy and all of those things. There are variants, but we know that we can move through the weirdness if we must. But the thing that I've been most focusing on, so we've also been under construction for 5 years. I've never had an office since I've been here at the park.
Wow.
And I know. But there's a thing, it's like when you go into the space that's really raw and incomplete, you start to imagine all the ways in which you will make it beautiful and make it stand out and make it welcoming for people. And you all know I go through Jeff One Row stuff all the time. What stoles do I need? What pyramids, what banners, what are we doing?
Frontals, altar accessories. Liturgical styles.
Absolutely. He makes a cope that I legit want, and because we all know Spiff loves a cape, and so anyways, but as I was walking through the space 2 weeks ago, I literally thought wow, some of Jeff's stuff would look just so beautiful in here. It would be such a great way to kind of tie it all together and work with him to make something custom, because we at the park love a good custom thing too. And so it's just one of those ways in which I have noticed spaces that are both beautiful and can be enhanced by the beauty of the gifts of others. And I think that Jeff really does that. And I'm noticing that with you right now. Our robes are really cool. Our robes are part of our ordination process. For those of us in disciples, you most often kind of put it on really for the first time in ordination spaces, but you get yours when you are ordained. And it's a beautiful thing, but it is enhanced by these stoles that really kind of pop and tell a story about who you are and where you're going with God. And I think that yours, particularly in this season, is just lovely.
Well, thank you. There is something to be said about this. The team at Jeff One Row Designs, they are fast, they are thorough, they are meticulous, and they are friendly. I remember I ordered a white stole with rainbow cranes on it, and I think I needed it for Pride. And I said to them, I know this is absurd, and you say there's this much time between ordering and shipping, and I don't want to pay for rush. And they said, okay. And I got it within a week. Because they're people who are equipping the church and equipping its folks to best express the gospel in a variety of ways. And it's a marvelous thing.
It's awesome. And we're going to get to it, folks. We are talking Rev today, the BBC. Yeah. The British show that is just truly incredible. And there's a lot of different ministries that I want to talk about later when we bring on our guest, which is our 5-timer, the Rev Sara Nave Fisher. And But Jeff is also doing a ministry. I've thought about this a lot, and that the way in which he shares, anytime you share your gift, it really is a ministry of the church. And he does that so beautifully and faithfully. And for our deuces out there, you know that you've got a special 15% off code, which is 2on115. So 2on1, all letter or all like written out as the title of our show, 2on1, and then 15. Yeah, it'll be right down here for those listening, or for those watching, there's a graphic, but for those listening, you will be able to hear it. But it's 2on115 for 15% off your whole stole order, which is just a gift on top of a gift. So we're grateful for Jeff and his sharing of this gift, and then the ways in which he makes it especially accessible to our deuces.
So head on over to Jeff Wunrow, JEFFWUNROW.com, and check out all of the copes, paraments, banners, frontals, altar accessories, processional banners, stoles for deacons, stoles for pastors, and the occasional mitre and cope in their online catalog. Customization options are available as well. Once again, that's Jeff Wunrow, JEFFWUNROW.com. Thanks again, Jeff Wunrow, for sponsoring 2on1.
Yeah.
All right. And speaking of processions, we should probably process in. Everybody's ready. I've got the altar incense.
Bells and smells.
Bells and smells, even though it's Lent. Let's bring in Sarah her fifth time.
Dun, 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 dun.
Sara Nave Fisher, for the fifth time. Welcome to 2on1. You are the first member of the Five Timers Club.
Woohoo! Thank you for having me.
Oh, you know, whole pom-pom.
It is always a delight.
We're glad you're here. Sarah, who are you? What are you doing? And what do you have to plug?
Ooh, I am Rev Sara Nave Fisher, living in Columbia, South Carolina. I am doing a few exciting things. One is Associate Pastor Supply. So if you are a pastor that finds you do not have enough hours in the week, but pulpit supply is maybe not the most helpful thing for you, I am your virtual virtual associate pastor. So I can be contacted at Sara Nave Fisher about that. But the most exciting thing, and what is pertinent to part of our conversation today, is I am a part of a group of clergy women who have all led our congregations through closure. So it's a really difficult thing that is the reality for a lot of churches and will be even more. So you can go to goodfridaycollaborative.com. We have a soft launch on the website right now. Look for more information by Holy Week. So goodfridaycollaborative.com. We are journeying with congregations and clergy through the difficult process of closure. And we're an ecumenical group. So it does not matter what denomination you come from.
Sarah, that's incredible.
I love it.
And that is why Rev is so near and dear to my heart.
Yeah.
It was hard to watch. Like, I really liked it, but I have a lot of feelings. And I'm now doing this thing where I actually like try to sit with them for more than 10 seconds before I distract myself with something shiny. Speaking of something shiny.
I mean, I love that. For those that don't know about the show, Arthur, do you want to give a little synopsis, or Sarah, do you want to give a little synopsis?
Rev.
Arthur usually does it, but I know that Sarah, this is, well, while Arthur pulls that up, just so that we have how they speak about it, because I think sometimes that's really helpful. Sarah, talk to us a little bit about why, because deuces, y'all know that we let our guests choose the episode, and Sarah has been suggesting this show for quite some time, but particularly for this season. And so we're really grateful that we get to do it in this season and have this conversation. But Sarah, why, talk to us a little bit about, you have a practice or a habit for this show, and talk to us a little bit about that.
Yes, I do. I actually first watched the show, I think, before I even started seminary, before I was in ministry, though I am a pastor's kid, married to a pastor's kid who's also a pastor. So I had a lot of very close personal connection with the life of the church. And I would say Rev sort of journeyed with me through seminary. And then it was at one point, probably in the middle of seminary, I began the practice of rewatching the final season during Holy Week. And for me, the last couple episodes take place during Holy Week and have a lot of amazing imagery that is like a retelling of the story of Holy Week and Good Friday and Easter. And so I have always appreciated that practice during Holy Week as a way to ground me in the church and ground me in the spirit and ground me in hope of resurrection, whatever that might look like.
I love that.
Follows the Reverend Adam Smallbone. He is an Anglican priest who begins to serve the socially disunited parish of, I forget the name of it, excuse me, but in East London. He's dealing with a church that is all too familiar probably to a lot of clergy in our circles and in our lives. And it's how he navigates his parishioner's life, his parish life, his own life, and his private life. And it's just really well done. And a marvelous show. Excuse me for just jumping right on what you were saying, because there's some depth and nuance and beauty to that. But I just wanted to make sure our viewers and listeners and our deuces knew what we're talking about.
And I would note that the show definitely has an emotional arc. The first season is pretty funny. So the first couple episodes are very relatable in a humorous way. And then the second season is more like character development. And then the third season like hits you with this raw vulnerability that the first couple of episodes don't necessarily indicate will happen. So if you don't know that that's going to happen, it is quite the journey that you go on.
It reminded me a lot of just the gospel format of there's always the I mean, we can talk about the early miracles and, you know, calling people and, oh, he healed a bunch of people at sunset and he preaches. And then at some point it becomes the transfiguration, and then it's just the descent.
Yeah, it's really beautiful. So I watched all of it. Sarah and I talked about this last week as we were kind of working, like Sarah and I were just having a conversation, and we ended up having a really cool conversation about this show. And I was like, we got to bring this next week. But it was like that first season is really what is like that come to the church, right? It's like what brings, especially like, I don't know, as an older adult who came to the church later in life, it was like, this is in part very much like what you're getting into, right? Like it's a little bit like, it's funny, it's a little everything, a little bit of everything. And then that second season really hits you with like the humanity of it all, like who you are as people together and as individuals, and what does that look like. And that third season for me really does talk, it's the church, but like not just the institutional church, but the local church, and what the church is like, kind of kingdom within us, kingdom among us sort of a thing, like that. It's really yeah, it hits me in that kind of arc too, that it hits those three kind of collective narratives, but sit in a little bit of a silo to each of them and have this focal point that really brings you to that conversation. And that last season about like, who is the church? What is the church? What is next for the church? Why the church are such pivotal conversations for the church to be having right now. And you start to see, when you look back, you start to see that they've been having these conversations, or you've been pointed towards that moment since day one. It's just whether or not you want to say, you want to notice it, or like point to it, or at least put your finger on the pulse. That was kind of all I had to say about that. You both are staring at me like,
no, it's yes.
How do you feel? Yes. Okay, so I want to I think in the entire series, my favorite line, and Sarah knows this, comes in episode 2. And I realize that it's part of kind of the more silly, funny version, but in episode 2, this small town parish partners with a megachurch, or this kind of evangelical pastor, and it's like all the people are coming in. It's a real, how do you count your people episode. And there is a line that's oh, now I want to pull it up because I meant to pull this up earlier, but essentially the Archbishop, or no, the pastor of the evangelical church is like, we'll see you next week, and Colin is like, this is just not for us, I'm sorry, like this is it, what you do, what you bring is great for you, and that's great, but like for what our people need, it's just not for us. And it's because he has a parishioner named Colin who journeys with him, who is, I don't know, how would y'all describe Colin?
A drunk, a repentant drunk.
Yeah, he's really faithful to like the community, like he is there, he is the one that's kind of like that like when things are broken, and you know, he's at the vicar's house like telling him, he's just in everything. He's that congregant that's everywhere and everything, and you kind of wish he had better boundaries, or he had better there's some boundary issues there on lots of different levels, but he touches a woman inappropriately, and they want him kicked out and all the things. And I really resonated with that as well, as being like, yeah, no, we need to like have consequences for our actions and things. But he doesn't get kicked out of the church in a way that is dismissive of his ability to be redeemed and to offer grace and help and support for, what is yet to come. And Adam essentially just says, no one cares about this guy, but he is vital to who we are as a community. And that's the reason he turns down all the money he has been dreaming of to like kind of help save his community. And it just brought for me a real nuance and pivotal moment of like the least of these being the ones that we need most in the church, rather than the dollars or the butts in the pews and things, as we're all having those conversations about coming back to church and how many people are coming back and what is giving down and all of that. Like, we're still there for God's people. And it was just a really beautiful moment. And I'm curious how that struck with you all, if it made any impression at all with you guys, and what you think.
I think the line, and this is what you'd brought up last week, was the line is, Colin doesn't matter to anyone except Jesus.
Thank you. Yes.
And that is the line that is true. I think it's true of a lot of church people. It's true of a lot of us, right? And church is really tricky because it's full of a lot of different kinds of people. And I think we're at our best when we remember that one of the things the church does best is include, and not just include as an afterthought, but have an intentional invitation for people who might not feel like they matter to anybody except Jesus.
Thank you. Yes.
It's fascinating to look at the temptation element in this show, because there's always it's always the temptation in it. I should never wear skinny jeans. I weigh 240 pounds and I'm 5'11". Like I know, like I carry it well. I'm also wearing black and a robe right now. So.
I think our faces were both like, wear whatever you want.
I see it.
Right. At first I didn't know if you were like embodying what you have heard somebody else say.
No, I don't think I would look good in them, and that's not my style. I should say it like this. There are very successful churches that promote a theology and a style of worship that is successful, but it is not authentic to the gospel as I understand it, or the calling that I have. There are plenty of tactics. I have a little part on my shelf of a person whose name I'm not even going to say because I really got annoyed. He wrote like 8 books about church growth that are really just 2 books repeated over and over again that cross-reference each other, and it's a brilliant scam. But great, butts in the seats, names in the database, and spiritual development, I guess, that from what I can tell from his website also involves a whole lot of guilt and shame and power over. The Collins are the ones we're supposed to minister with. Not minister to, but minister alongside. And I'm sorry, I shouldn't say a repentant drunk without the caveat of, as somebody who understands the depths and widths and breadth of that particular idolatry, there is certainly a true repentance and true need to belong to Colin in his failure, as opposed to Colin once he is redeemed. Because Colin is redeemed by being present, rather than Colin is redeemed through some sort of demands from the community. He needs better boundaries, but there's a lot to be said about showing up, especially when you're a less than.
Well, and it's like, and I named earlier, and I don't want it to go out without saying sorry. And then, but like, he touches the bottom of a girl that comes to visit, and like, that's not okay. And I'm not saying that people have to worship with people that have abused them or anything like that, right? But Colin brings a real nuance of like the sins that we carry in lots of different spaces or in lots of different ways. He has lots of different things. And so, and I think I just really resonated with him because I tend to draw a real hard line on like some things. And he helped me wrestle with lots of different ways in which I have named people as sinful or things as sinful without also saying, and they matter to Jesus. So like, I just wanted to name that. I'm not trying to say you must worship with your abusers and welcome them in or anything like that. But Colin helps, I think, as a particular character in this show, helps us wrestle well with the spaces of brokenness that are part of who we are as the larger body of Christ. Sarah, how do you feel about Colin? I just went on a real Colin tangent.
It's interesting. I liked Colin a lot more on this rewatch than I had in the past, which I found interesting. And maybe a part of it is because of his faithfulness that the first time through, you don't really know where any of these characters are going to end up. And of course, 2 on 1 is a spoiler show. And the series finale was like 8 years ago. So if you haven't watched it, spoilers. But, even at the very end, like he is one of the most important people at the very end. And Adam ends up relying on him quite a lot for friendship in a way that I think Adam even wrestles with what that means. Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, like, that the church is the most important thing in Colin's life. And it's a mutual relationship. Like he needs the church and that church needs him. And he is that sort of ever present. I think for me, Colin as a character, it might have even been in the pilot, in the very first episode. It is just such a perfect encapsulation of who Colin is, that they spend the whole episode, he is going to find the person that broke the church's windows. He spends his whole, he is dedicated to finding it, to bringing justice. And then in the final scene, you realize that he had inadvertently broken the church's windows himself. And I think that is such a great reminder of who Colin is, that, he's messy and complicated and we love him.
When he sees the humanity, I think in Adam, maybe more than anyone else in his congregation. I think his wife, and I want to get to Alex in just a moment because she's incredible. But Colin, it's very much like have a beer, have a smoke, there is a human to human connection there in a way that kind of dissipates the pastoral authority, congregational, kind of power dynamic. Like they sit on a bench together and have a cigarette or what, and in the grittiness of their humanity in ways that feel very much like church outside of the church.
Right. And he still respects him. He sees him as human. And then I think it was so beautiful there at the very end, his dog died and he comes to the vicarage and says, I know you're not, Adam had resigned. I know you're not my priest, but my dog needs a funeral. So even at the very end, it's like those titles didn't matter as much, but he both saw Colin saw Adam's humanity and respected and, looked up to him in, I think, an appropriate way.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry, you wanted to talk about Alex, Viv. I don't want to.
No, go ahead. That was a really beautiful.
There's a humanity that I think gets lost in ministry. There is I remember I had to tell one person, I was chewed out a few years ago at a previous setting, stormed into my church and explained to me why I was basically the biggest piece of shit on the planet. Because they were upset about choices that were made by leadership in the direction of the one congregation in this one specific place. And there was a lot of passion and there was a lot of ownership without it being that terrible word. There was a buy-in, there was pour into it. But at one point I said, you need to stop talking to me like I'm not a human being. You have to understand that, yes, I Rev is in front of my name, or for today's purposes, Archbishop, but I'm still a person. And why is it okay to talk to anyone like this, especially when you profess Jesus and I profess Jesus? And I love Adam's struggles to be human, and his insistence almost, or inability to escape that in this show.
Episode 1, I think it felt very much like a documentary in a weird way, right? There's just people are yelling at you. You've got your home life, your work life. You're trying to figure out that balance. Your church window's broken and it's all anyone cares about, except for the Archbishop, who's how many people are there? And are you doing a good thing? And it's I don't know about you, but I was oh, this felt like a mirror I did not necessarily want, but also very much needed, because my big pet peeve often is, and I've got some people, friends in casting, I'm always texting them. I'm like, why have you not cast a woman in this role, which is a different issue, but the way in which it held that we as pastors are called to this profession, but not without our humanness, not without our who we are as people. And like, you can't distinguish that. We aren't just entirely, we're not robots, right? Like, we have feelings and emotions and thoughts, and we're gonna get things wrong. And like, sometimes you just want to go have a funeral conversation in a bar over a beer, and sometimes you're gonna be hungover if you are someone that drank, but like, there are these little nuances of just who Adam held in that first episode that set the stage for how you were to understand him as a person and how you were to understand him in this role, that I found to be really, I don't know, kind of helpful. Like, I want every search committee to watch this first episode and be like, remember, these people are human.
And I think we see that the best through his prayers. Like, for me, I don't know that I would have loved the show as much as I did if it weren't for his prayers, because that ties in that tension that he carries between his humanity and his role.
He has great
liturgy. All of us should. So it is March. It's March 2022 as we're recording this. And I think it's important to note that, because 1, we are in the season of Lent. 2, you may be listening to this in the future. And if so, we warned you. And also 3,
Arthur's ghost voice is making an appearance again.
Total ghost voice, thank you. And also 3, it's been 2 years since this pandemic set in, right? And what I saw about a year ago was this great resignation of aggressive personality types from ministry. Like, many, I would say almost categorically, all of the people who resigned, who are just like, I'm done. I can't do this anymore. I'm walking away from pastoral ministry, not just the congregation I serve, were without a doubt 3s, 7s, and 8s on the Enneagram. And I think that has to deal with the difference between hope and optimism, because right now there is no optimism, or there's no real optimism. Spiff is looking at me like I'm crazy, for those of you listening.
No, I'm just processing what you're thinking as a 3, 7, and 8 both all sit here.
Right. And now there's this new wave of resignations coming out, and that's from some of the remaining aggressive types, but also obviously more of that. Like, I've seen 4 different friends who have announced their departure from pastoral ministry in the last 10 days. This has been a terrifying and challenging season on everyone. It is easy to forget that we are in a pandemic that is not being managed well, because we've politicized the shit out of everything. I'm going to say shit a lot in this episode. If you're one of my congregants listening to this, you might want to stop, or just deal with the fact that it's a biblical word. But also too, like, Adam refuses to let go of hope through the course of this show. It's not optimism, it's hope. And hope has to be discerned, and hope has to be panned, right? Like, what is it? The sculpture beyond belief. There's always something that it's like, maybe this will be it, maybe this will be that, because the mission of the church underlies it. What do we do with the mission of the church that has become, and I mean the bigger church, or perhaps congregations, that has become muddled into what always was, must always be? How do we deal with, for example, the closure of congregations, or the inevitable insistence on normalcy that was abandoned during COVID? How do we process change together? How do we embrace change together? And would you mind talking a little bit about concluding a congregation's life, dear Sarah?
Yeah, I mean, you just asked a lot of really big questions. So I'm sort of processing through all of those. But I guess to start with that last one that was more specific, one of the things, as someone who has closed a church, and if you don't know me, not only was I pastoring a congregation through its closure, our final service was on Easter Sunday last year. So that whole idea holds a lot of meaning. We were lamenting together during Lent, and I see a lot of things. It was interesting rewatching this for the first time with that experience in hindsight, Because from the beginning, as Stephanie said, there were elements, like you could see it, this congregation did not close in a vacuum. It was already in the air before Reverend Smallbone even got there. And you see it sort of happening in process, and times that he could have maybe made a decision that maybe wasn't the most faithful thing, but could have, quote unquote, saved his church, and he chose not to. Also clearly made mistakes along the way. But one of the things that this time I noticed that I found interesting that I don't think he did well is pastored his congregation through the closure. I talk a lot about the tension that we have to hold as congregational pastors between pastoring the system of the church, the institution of the church, and pastoring the people in the church. And I think a lot of times clergy sort of err on the side of pastoring the people. So we are very invested in providing pastoral care to individuals in a way that shields us from maybe doing what's best for the institution. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean for the system, that body as a group. And closing a congregation requires a very delicate balance between those two things. And what I noticed is he was trying to save Saint Savior in the Marshes. So, yeah, but we never really see him sitting down with Adoa and Colin and even Nigel and processing their grief and, talking through what this means for their faith if the congregation isn't there. And you see that come out at the end when they all blame him. They say, you abandoned us. You left us. And, he's like, well, what else was I supposed to do? But I think he didn't do the best job in leading them faithfully to that, which is frankly why the Good Friday Collaborative that I'm working with sort of emerged as a way to help congregations and clergy have that conversation in a faithful way. I think would be really interesting to see a one-off Rev episode 2 years into a pandemic, right? Mm-hmm. Like what does that church, I mean, clearly that one closed, but what does another church look like in the same situation 2 years into a pandemic? It's a really tricky conversation, and there isn't an answer, I think.
Well, so Deuces, you'll know, Sarah, we're all friends, but I watched Sarah do the really faithful work of closing Rolling Oaks last year. And it was some of the best work of the church I have been able to witness in my time as a person of faith. And I know it was really hard for you, and it still is a tender space because you care so deeply for these people and the church. None of us come and stay in this vocation. Honestly, we talk about this all the time. I don't know, congregations, if you don't know this, your pastor is on the daily, why did I get into this? And also I choose this. We choose to be in this role on the daily because honestly, it most days just feels like you can't do anything else. Because if we could, we probably would, because it's hard. This work is very hard, and it's really great. And it's really, I don't know, and everything in between. And I don't think, we talk about the hard things of church where it's you got to give more, you got to show up, you got to do all the things, but closing a church for the good of the community, for the good of the faith, for the good of God's worshiping people, for the good, the good of it all, to not just be a waste of resources or, to sit there because it's what you've always done. That's the real hard work. I love that you called it the Good Friday Collaborative, because again, as someone who came to this faith later in life, all I'd ever heard kind of socially is Easter, right? Because it's that's a real, as much as it means to us as people of faith, it's a socially celebrated thing. Everyone, I've celebrated Easter my whole life, knew very little of Jesus. And Holy Week in and of itself, I love a good Maundy, Thursday service. It's my favorite service of the year. And I think that it's because you're asked to be in community with the people that will hurt you, the people that will support you, just all of it. But we can't get to Easter without Good Friday. And the Good Friday is the hard part. When we are we got to follow Jesus, and it's oh, it's so hard to love my neighbor. It's so hard to love it. It's no, the hard part is actually like the sacrificial space in which you must do something so challenging as to, in Jesus' case, give up, his humanity, let's say, for the sake of something so much bigger. And that is what I watched you do last year, is to say, I love these people so much that I need to help them walk through this space so that they can resurrect. Because I have never seen the work of Rolling Oaks stop, because how you continue to pastor to people, how you continue, I got to know a couple of your congregants, because everyone was helping each other out in those early pandemic days of how do you do stuff, it's like, and then you become, friends on Instagram or whatever, you follow them. And it's like the work of the church still lives on. The Spirit of God in those people is still very much alive and thriving. And so you closed a church, but like you opened new possibilities of resurrection for God and God's people. And I think that we forget to name that. And that is what Colin doesn't do well, I think is how you name it, like
Adam doesn't do well.
Sorry, yes, Adam. Adam doesn't do well is say like, yes, we are closing, and yes, the Spirit of God is still alive and it will continue and thrive in just new ways. But you got to cut those dead limbs off if you want new growth.
Well, and at the end, it was really Alex that did that.
And
in a lot of ways. And, when they're gathered in the church on Easter morning and she's putting his vestments on and you hear his internal prayer, his internal monologue that is prayer. And he says, well, I found myself back in a cassock. Is this what resurrection is? Mm-hmm. And I love that he names resurrection as something other than the church not closing its doors. I have to say that of everything that did feel real, a lot of things felt real about that. One of them, and so for a moment of levity, is the you just need to go see Roland. Because the number of times I heard the most compassion and love and good intentions, well, have you tried this? Have you talked to this person? As though there's a program that's going to save churches, or a person's idea that's going to save all churches.
Well, no, I completely agree. And I'm always hesitant about the verb saved. And I get what you were saying in that. And I think you were using that language intentionally. And it's that some of the people I love the most in my congregation come from traditions in which you are saved, or one is saved. And I think, so I don't know if you know this, I've been studying the Corinthian letters of Paul pretty much daily forever.
We all know this, Arthur.
Oh, okay. Well, and an update for y'all. I'm almost done with the 8th chapter of 2 Corinthians. We are in the final descent. I should be done by 2024. And we warned you. There's this idea of a daily reprieve, right? The message of the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing, but to those who are being saved, it is the power of God. And it's like salvation is a daily process. It's not I'm sorry, I reject once saved, always saved, not as because you can go to hell at any second, but because we can't just rest on our laurels. Mm. And I loved the ending. Again, Rev messed me up. Every show we've watched about religion this year, what was the horror Midnight Mass? Like Midnight Mass also messed me up, totally different way.
I won't watch that. Mm-mm.
No, like I don't need to watch horror movies. I'm scared of everything already. But salvation has to be that process. And I think Adam actually faithfully wrestles with what is salvation, what is resurrection, because it sure as hell isn't just Jesus sitting up on the slab on Sunday morning once.
Yeah. I mean, I think that
it can't happen without it. But sorry, I'm not like rejecting that, obviously.
No, but I think that the communal part of resurrection is what it often becomes law, right? The resurrection is actually in beloved community. The resurrection is possible. Salvation is possible right here, right now. If, you turn to your neighbor, see God at work, see Jesus in them, and here you are, saved into one another with one another. it's not the yet to come or yet to be, but is present, if you just notice it well, and lean in. Yeah, I don't know. I think how I've defined salvation is, I think, changed 11 different times in as many minutes, days, and hours. But I do want to talk, because we named her earlier, but Alex, Adam's wife, shout out to all those clergy spouses out there, doing the hard work of church, without getting any of the credit of doing the hard work of church. But as she's helping him put that on, like, she plays such a pivotal role in his call and how he leads, how the community understands him. She's also Olivia Colman, so she's also the queen. And for those of you that are, fans of The Crown, and she's just incredible. And she kind of wants nothing to do with the church other than, like, she wants her husband's vocation to thrive. Like, she wants him to be a good person and good pastor because he feels called to be a pastor and is a good person. And she's that kind of talisman that says, like, no, here's who you are. Like, don't forget that. And I think that it's a really undervalued ministry that she provides the whole congregation, without them knowing it. And I'm just curious what you all, how you all took in, as those of you, like, well, Sarah, you've already named, you are married to a clergy person. And Arthur, you are married, but not to a clergy person per se. Did that strike either of you? As, I don't know, how do you feel about Alex?
She's my favorite. She is absolutely my favorite character, for several reasons. One is that there's a scene in that second episode that we've already referenced where that sort of evangelical megachurch pastor is like, oh, did you do the flowers? And she's like, no, because I never do the flowers. And second, I was at work, and like, is kind and cordial and also passive aggressive and isn't going to put up with it. So she cares about the members of the church. I think my favorite relationship is between Alex and the archdeacon, because they have a mutual respect and they both know that, like, neither of them is out to impress the other one. But Adam sort of unites them, so they're in each other's lives. I love the support, and I think that you named that well. She cares about the church because she loves and is fiercely loyal to her husband. And so, the church is what it is, but for her, what matters is Adam. And so the church is a part of Adam's life, and so it's important to her.
Alex is my favorite as well. I'm kind of married to an Alex. I think there's another conversation, probably not in this episode, about what it is to be married to a clergy person and what it is to be same-sex partnered in a church. I'm not trying to practice any sort of erasure. It's
it's different.
Brian does not have to play the piano or teach Sunday school. There's not the expectation of it. But sometimes people don't really know what to do, and that's where he thrives, I think, because he has very clear boundaries, and he has been invited into a leadership position in the church. And the only thing I have said about it to the church is, Brian and I disagree about things in the life of this congregation. His views are his, and you are inviting him to serve on this board. I do not get a proxy vote through my husband. Also, he does not represent me. But that's exactly how it is. I will also say that our first Christmas after we were married, I bought him a coffee mug that said pastor's wife, and he loves it.
I mean, and also, just like, for what it's worth, you can say gay on this program because we'll say gay every single day. We love our deuces out there in all the states in which you don't. But we're not afraid to say gay here on 211.
On the queer perspective is all I'm saying.
No, I know. I'm just
to practice the erasure of bisexual people, even if they're in a different gendered relationship,
which I appreciate, and also it's a different experience.
Yes,
all those things are very true. Yeah.
Yep.
Oh, there was something else I was going to say about Alex. When she meets the other clergy spouses, and then they get there and half of them are clergy themselves, and she's like, oh, this is going to be awful. And then they end up just having such a great time. I loved that. I felt like that was a very authentic scene.
They had a clergy person who was a consultant on this, and I kind of loved it.
Several, I think.
Yeah.
I did want to ask, and I'm sorry, Spiff, I'm jumping the.
No, you're fine. I watched that show. Just my only thing, I'm not married, so it doesn't matter. Like, people are often asking me, like, it's not that I don't want to partner or get married or anything like that. But I look for someone like the male version of Alex. Let me just put it that way. I don't need someone that is clergy, someone that is in the church. I actually think I want someone that supports me and my call and my vision and understands the working of the church, has a best interest for the church at heart, through their love of me. And I see that best. I watched Alex in just her arc, and I was like, okay, dude, who are you out there? Who are you? Because I need that. If you're on the dating apps, they ask you to, what's your religion? Are you Christian? Blah, blah, blah. And it's like everyone, if I say Christian, it's generally not this, we generally don't agree on what that term means, or my role as a woman in the church, let's say. And so it was a hard dynamic. And I watched her and I was like, that's it. That's the partner that I long for, is someone that loves the church so deeply through their love of me. And not to be narcissistic about that, but that is just, I feel would best suit me well, but also I feel like is a good thing for the church. We're all three of us are Bethany Fellows, and Bethany Fellows like to say that they're serving the congregations through the support of congregational pastors, or at least like that was the impetus for like that gathering. And that's the type of clergy spouse that I look for as well. Someone that loves the church faithfully and fully through their support and love of me.
Oh, I had a
name Bethany Fellows because they are a part of our upcoming book, and we are very excited.
We'll plug it. Are you still watching? So the Great British Baking Show, or this has an actual question attached to it. They tried to make an American version and it failed, because the American audience and market requires elimination and requires drama and requires The Amazing Race, I would argue, is like the least American reality show there ever was. But so I was thinking about it with Rev. I was like, could we ever possibly do an American version of Rev? And that is to say, is American, and specifically white American Protestant church culture, able to be conveyed faithfully in such a way that wouldn't have like an immediate draw to like, oh, the priest is actually a polygamist or whatever else? And it's nothing against polygamy. It would have to be some sort of outstanding scandal essentially and immediately and centered in it.
I made the joke that I wanted to do a Sexton in the City thing. Like, what would it look like to like follow me for a dating life? What does it look like, right, for a single clergy person to, kind of pop the collar and say like, here I am. For those of you that don't know, that's how these work. And I pop my collar on my shirt for those listening. And but to say, right, like, what does it mean to know that your pastor is sexual, to know that your pastor is, swears, or I don't know, gets dressed and dances in their underwear. So, you know what I mean? Like the real kind of humanness that makes all of us, before we put on our shirts, our robes, our stoles, to say like, and this is the church. Like, I don't know, that was could we make that show? I'm not entirely sure. I think it would have to, I don't know. Sarah, what do you think?
I think that one of the things that makes Rev work so well is a shared understanding in England of the Church of England and the history and the institution of the church, that I think fills in some context that would need to be explained and explored to do it in an American version. And the American church is so vast in understanding of what church means and looks like. I don't know. I think that it would only work well if you were really specific about who and what it was you were representing. And then I would worry it would be too niche to have a broad appeal. but I'd like to see somebody try. I love shows about clergy.
I want to go back to Sexton in the City. I think that'd be kind of.
I mean, whoever's out there in casting.
I will
I'm
say,
here.
dating wise, when I was on the apps before I met my wonderful spouse, I would get it where people would be like, "Oh, you're a minister. I'm going to come to your church." And I was like, "If you walk into my church, you become a congregant, and I can never date you."
Yeah, that's a real thing.
Right. Like, you cannot do this. And they're like, "Well, it won't matter with me." I'm like, "No, it will, because ethics are a real thing that we do."
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and on that note, so this isn't exactly what you're talking about, Stephanie, but it made me think of it. And I would love to see an interplay between Sexton in the City and Abby. We haven't mentioned Abby. She only shows up for one episode, but what I love is they bring in a young woman who is incredibly competent and brilliant and just is great at what she does, so much so that she moves on and doesn't stay there. And so even though this show only really features one female vicar, other than the ones that get drunk with Adam's wife, I love that the one that they do bring on, they show her as being extraordinarily competent at her job. So maybe she would partner up with Sexton in the City.
Yes. And we also haven't mentioned, because we're not at time, but we're getting close. We haven't mentioned Nigel. And I want to be like, we all have a Nigel in our community, or have dealt with Nigels.
Or have been Nigel.
What?
I said, or have been Nigel.
Or have been Nigel, which is, as someone who works in the church is all the things, is often keeping the space running, but sometimes gets really rigid and doesn't allow for the expansiveness of the Spirit possibly to move in different ways. But sometimes you also can't do it without him. And so a really pivotal point. And so I wanted to get y'all's thoughts on Nigel for a second.
The hyper competent folk, the church wouldn't run without them, but the church can't change with them. Is that really how I'm to understand Nigel? Because I don't necessarily remember him. Sarah, or I do remember, I just don't have a lot to say on it. Sarah, what do you think?
I was annoyed with how much compassion I felt for Nigel at the end, because I didn't like him. And then at the end, I had compassion for him. And then that annoyed me in my humanity. I do. Nigel is complicated and tragic and clearly acts out of a rigid understanding. I also wonder what rigid understanding of call and ministry the church has that rejects someone like Nigel, that has a lot to offer, and instead of cultivating the gifts that he brings, sort of said, I mean, institutionally, the church said, you can't be a priest, just because of personality, really, like at that point, in season 2 when he's rejected. So I complicated, but at the end, I felt the most human point was at the very end. He had reported Adam, and all of that is sort of cleared, but it's still very delicate. And I think Adam interprets it that Nigel is angry, or I think that Adam interprets judgment, that he feels like Nigel is judging him. And Nigel says, you abandoned us, or something to that effect. And it reveals that maybe Nigel had a more complicated feeling as well.
Yeah, I think that 100%. It's one of those things we all know him. It's the people that have this really straight and narrow understanding of what the church has, a lot of really great institutional memory, has a lot of great understanding of, has spent time with the Bible, has spent time in faith, has developed their relationship to God in ways that are really beautiful and great. And we undervalue them for lots of different reasons. And then also, they're a challenge to work with sometimes, especially if you are someone that may be called to a more expansive narrative of what the church could be rather than what the church is. And but there can be, I think, with good relation, I mean, it's why it's all built on relationship, right? Like that, with good transparent communication and relationship, you can have a both and. You can have a yes but, you get to have those conversations that really move us all forward in both faith and fellowship. And so and I think he gets caught in the crosshairs of that often, of all that. Yeah.
Oh, well, I was just going to say, and also I think Nigel's character, and one of the things we have not really named or talked about, and I recognize we're toward the end of our time here, but is the way Rev deals with orientation in a lot of different ways throughout the show. And Nigel's character is a part of that. And so I would love to see a spinoff that focuses on Nigel 10 years later and what has happened with his life as he has maybe even come into his own and come into his personhood in a more authentic way. And that is a part of the way the church, kind of the larger church, even is in doesn't always allow space for people to be authentic.
Yeah. I think the way in which what you just said, the kind of the posturing of all of them, or what was the language you used? You said the sorry.
I don't
okay. I was like, listening. But also just the casting of this show, I don't want to go without naming that they're, it's super white. They have cast their people of color, primarily their Black people, castmates and congregants, like the one, please remind me of her name. The woman that's in the Adoa, yeah, like she's very sexual, she's sexualized and things like that. And then there is the man who shows up to wash the windows in the middle of the night. Mick, yeah, and it's just, things like that, in which this show both reflects absolutely the church today, as I think some of us have experienced it, and also does not age well in some ways in which we can name, racism still within casting and culture and things like that still very much exist and need to be named and nuanced. So I just didn't want us to move in and without naming that when you watch it, also be prepared for that there is this space too.
Well, Sara Nave Fisher, thank you for coming on the show for the 5th time and for being the pioneer into our 5-timers club here on 2 on 1. As you have no doubt understood 4 times before and will from here and ever shall be, we do conclude our interviews, our conversations with a final question, which oftentimes, the majority of the time, Spiff asks because she does it so well.
I'm happy to ask it. Sara, happy 5-timers. We'll send you your robe soon. But what biblical theme, narrative, character, verse are you most reminded of in Rev?
There's obviously like 1,000 to choose from, explicitly named in the show, but the one that sat with me the most was yesterday's lectionary text, which is the parable of the fig tree. Because there's hope that's a part of this, and the gardener is cultivating, but it's not producing the way maybe others would hope it would produce. But my favorite part of that parable is that we don't know how it ends. And at the end, like, does the fig tree produce fruit the next year? Do they dig it up? What happens? We don't know, because that's not the most important thing. That's not what matters the most. And the show sort of ended the same way. Like, we don't know if Adam finds another job or decides to return to ministry. We don't know what other worshiping communities people find. We don't know how each of them evolve, both as a community and as individuals. And for me, that is the hope. The hope is we don't know how it ends. And so we can actively participate in writing that next chapter.
Like it. Eugene Peterson in Tell It Slant said, the trick is with the manure, because it smells dead, but it is teeming with life. I really, the parable of the fig tree, I have a lot to say about it, but that's your answer. My answer, I'm going to go with 1 Corinthians 13, in that these 3 remain: faith, hope, and love, and the greatest of these is love. Because what Paul is saying is not just read this at weddings, but instead faith and hope are vital right now because things have not culminated. It is love that is eternal in it. And I think Adam has a grasp on the love. I think faith and hope go up and down throughout the series, and it's good to see clergy that struggle with faith. Because damn, shouldn't all of us do so? But the greatest of those is love.
Oh, okay. So mine kind of pivots off of Arthur's, the struggle of that is that I watched this, and for whatever reason, I read the Doubting Thomas story like really recently for kind of no reason other than sometimes I just flop open a Bible and read what is there. And And that's where I landed on. And I think so often, our congregants want us to be Jesus. We want some version of like maybe Peter as the rock of the church, maybe Paul as that kind of great like evangelist. But if we're faithful to like our humanity, the real truth of it all, we'd lean more into being doubting Thomas and saying like, I am not sure every single morning that I'm doing the right thing, that I am in the right space, that we are the right people in the right time for all of this. And I think Adam does that really well. And all of them kind of embody that doubt as a spiritual gift, as what they need to discern what is next. And so I'm going to go with Adam, but really every character at any given point, that like kind of that theme of doubting Thomas, that that if we can hold doubt as something really beautiful, and as a gift to the church, rather than our certainty, that we would be a whole lot more capable of the change that we are called into.
I like it. Sorry, I was just noting in my files that Spiff called Paul great. Sara Nave Fisher, thank you for coming on to 2-on-1 for the 5th time. We certainly appreciate it. Would you please plug your stuff?
Sure thing. You can find me at saranavefisher.com for associate pastor supply and a cohort of people at goodfridaycollaborative.com, where we journey with clergy and congregations at some point in the process of closing, even if it's the very beginning of the conversation.
Indeed. And this is the continuation of our conversation, of course, Sara, and we're so glad you're here with us. Friends, we will be back again with another episode of 2-on-1. Until then, deuces.
JeffOneRow.com and use 2-on-115 for 15% off your entire still purchase, because we all need the support of others, and Jeff One Row supports us so faithfully.
And it's the season of Lent. So friends, just remember, Advent is coming.
Okay.
On behalf of 2-on-1, I am the Reverend Arthur Stewart.
I'm the Reverend Stephanie Kendall.
I'm the Reverend Sara Nave Fisher.
Hell yeah, you are. See you later, deuces.
Yeah, you are. See ya.
Get more 2-on-1 at 2on1project.com.